Okay, now that everybody's quiet, our next performer is Mayar. Everybody, give it up.
هاي أنا ميار. بس كده خلاص insignificant، ما عنديش أي introduction تانية. إيه؟ حاضر، سامعيني كويس طيب؟ طيب, can you please help me and raise your hand if you've ever heard the phrase life is a bunch of ups and downs? Nice. Some people are gonna relate. So I've heard that phrase before, and every time I do, I have this mental image pop up in my head that life is a trampoline, a blue trampoline. I have this mental image pop up in my head that life is a trampoline, a blue trampoline with a grey metal edge, and rather than being made of cloth, it's made of some rubbery, extremely flexible material. And despite that being a very childish mental image, it accomplishes two things. One, that life is unstoppable, there's no rest, you're always on the move, up and down and up and down and up and down. And two, that life is a bunch of ups and downs. And while up and down resemble directions in physics, in my story they resemble happiness and sadness. Now the thing is, I'm trying to draw a scene that rock bottom is a set of blades underneath the trampoline. So you're jumping, living basically, up and down and up and down and up and down until something hits you out of the blue. Something saddens you and you're falling down harder than usual. You're gonna fall further than usual, and consequently you get your feet cut by the blade. Consequently you touch rock bottom. You touch rock bottom and you cannot wait to get out of there because God, it's cold and harsh and painful. I mean, it's a blade through your feet. Can you imagine it? But then you do get out of there fast enough, back to your normal routine of life, up and down and up and down and up and down. Until something hits you again. Something hits you again, but it hits you harder than the first time. You're falling heavier than the first time, and consequently, you get your feet cut by the blade again. You touch rock bottom again, but even though that when you compare how much time you spend this time with how much time you spend the first time, this time's definitely longer, but this time somehow is less painful. Somehow, this time is starting to feel comfortable. But then again, you don't get too comfortable. You're back up the trampoline again, up and down and up and down and up and down, until something hits you again. But it hits you harder than anything that has ever hit you. Hell, it doesn't hit you, it slaps you. Something slaps you so hard that you're falling down, suffering the extra gravity, falling down as heavy as a mountain. Hell, you're not falling, you're being sucked in by a black hole, and you cannot help but suffer the extra gravity. You cannot help but have the blades puncturing through your feet. And even though it hurts like hell, but it really doesn't. It really doesn't hurt as much as it did the first time. It's not as cold as it did the first time. This time the comfort is starting to make sense. This time you know what Johnny Cash meant by saying the old familiar thing when he was talking about self-harm. This time it's starting to make sense. You're starting to develop familiar corners. You're starting to develop familiar pain. This time you know how it will hurt and you know where it will hit. But then again, you're up the trampoline, and it takes a couple of more hits to cause a tear in your trampoline. And when that happens, you're entirely exposed, you're entirely vulnerable. And by entirely, I mean that you could be fixing breakfast one day and you wouldn't find your favorite tea, so you'd break down and cry. By entirely, I mean you're entirely exposed and vulnerable, and the slightest hit will cause you massive pain. But and your poor helpless self keeps going, thinking that things will be better, but little did it know that the tear will only get wider and more dramatic, till your only chance of not being hurt is landing on the grey metal edge. And despite that being your only chance of not being hurt, you don't really like it. You don't really like it because the cold metal edge feels like salt to your fresh wounds, because you'd rather stay here at rock bottom where it's familiar and it's warm. I mean, it's painful, but it's familiar. And I guess that's a sign to toxic relationships, familiarity. But that's not what's heartbreaking about this story. What's heartbreaking about this story is the neighboring trampolines. My mother's trampoline, my father's, my lover's trampoline, and my best friend's trampoline. They're all there jumping through their own lives. And my mom's heart is in pieces every time she sees me in pain, which, as you concluded, is all the fucking time. But on the bright side, my dad is always there offering help and offering band-aids, and my best friend is suffering the same. And it's nice to have someone who understands, but God, I wish she didn't. I wish she weren't suffering the same. It's nice to have someone who understands, but it's not nice to see someone you love suffer. But my lover is standing there with an empty stare, drowning in the helplessness of his sea blue eyes. And I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry, Mom, I let the tear get bigger than your sewing skills can fix. I'm sorry, Dad, but you cannot heal stab wounds with band-aids. I'm sorry, love. I'm sorry, love, I just couldn't love you because I cannot fall in love with a blade and the sea at the same time. Because my feet were freshly wounded all the time and I just couldn't handle the salty water. And I'm sorry, Self. I'm sorry, Self, I couldn't save you and the tear kept getting bigger and I didn't know what to do. And most of all, I'm sorry, God. I'm sorry, God, I just couldn't look up long enough to find you.
لا لا هي ما قالتش كده. لا انا ما بعيطش. لا
No.